there were two things that always bothered me about the one that JJ and I did. One was that the main thing was that he focused his camera so tightly on Tom and the actors all the time. We were all around the world in these most amazing locations, and you would never know it from watching the movie. And I think that was a really wasted opportunity on his part. But he was relatively speaking, a brand new large
Director. Yeah.
maker. He hadn't done anything of that scale before. And it was still early enough in our collaboration, which lasted about 10 years, that he was indeed finding his way as a visual storyteller at that time. And I think you could see from the next movie that he did after that one, he learned a lot from Mission Impossible.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. On today's episode, I have Scott Chambliss. He's a production designer on lots of different films that has come out over the last 2 decades, especially with J.J. Abrams. Mission Impossible 3, starring Tom Cruise and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Lovely guy, great conversation. There were some interesting tidbits that we talked about, that what he felt of the film at the time and what I felt of the film at the time, and how things look a little bit different, at least for me, and a bunch of other stuff. And he was really nice enough to send a really nice email, which we'll post on social media, about how much he enjoyed the conversation and whatnot. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Scott on Mission Impossible 3. Well, good to have you.
Thank
I
you.
know we've been sort of going back and forth, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done in our world, in the film world, and especially being here to talk about Mission Impossible 3. And I just watched it again yesterday. To me, I'm a huge fan of J.J. Abrams because I think he has this ability to pull emotion out of actors and characters that he writes, even in Lost. I mean, he was a part of it, obviously not just the main person. There was a lot of emotional in this film, especially the way it begins. The whole scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman, who was phenomenal in this film. And the emotional arc in this film was much stronger than, in my view, than any other film of Mission Impossible series. That's just my take.
Yeah, I understand that.
What about you?
Um, well, to be honest, I haven't seen number three since it came out, so I'm I never go see my own movies after they're out. I really enjoyed Brad Bird's movie, which I think was number four, but
Yes.
because it had a strong sense of humor. And the one thing that there were two things that always bothered me about the one that JJ and I did. One was that the main thing was that he focused his camera so tightly on Tom and the actors all the time. We were all around the world in these most amazing locations, and you would never know it from watching the movie. And I think that was a really wasted opportunity on his part. But he was relatively speaking, a brand new large
Director. Yeah.
maker. He hadn't done anything of that scale before. And it was still early enough in our collaboration, which lasted about 10 years, that he was indeed finding his way as a visual storyteller at that time. And I think you could see from the next movie that he did after that one, he learned a lot from Mission Impossible and started embracing visual storytelling more and more as time went on, and he became more secure in his projects.
It's interesting you mentioned that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because as of maybe 8, 9 years ago, I started realizing as a director that how important it is to have a wide frame so you can see the surroundings and the environment that your character is in. And I learned that a lot from, obviously, from Spielberg and Quentin Tarantino's work. I mean, there are other directors too, but mainly those two, and Robert Zemeckis. For Mission Impossible 3, from an emotional and arc and story standpoint and performance standpoint, that was to me the best film. But you're right in terms of the camera. Like even when I was watching it yesterday, I couldn't figure out where was this place. And now if you watch like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you will get the vastness of it, kind of like the Lawrence of Arabia approach and all that. So yeah, I agree with you on that 100%.
Hmm.
Amazing. So let's talk about your career, Scott. How did it all begin?
Let's see. I was devoted to theater actually, and got a graduate degree in that at Carnegie Mellon. And right out of graduate school, was asked to join Tony Walton in his design studio doing Broadway shows. And I thought I would do that for, doing theater for the rest of my life. But after about 4 years, living in the business of Broadway, I really grew to hate theater. And Um, uh, and back in those days, the design community at a certain level, the designers who were doing the top jobs, whether it was theater or film or television in New York City, we all kind of knew each other or knew of each other, and I was able to move, slowly out of theater and into film design, and that blew my mind. Film design just opened the whole world to me because it's an unlimited medium in many regards, and I really quickly realized that I need to be a designer of films. So I started doing that in New York and moved to Los Angeles because it was the inevitable thing to do back in those days. This was where the industry was based, and most of the jobs were here. And that's sadly not at all true anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was lucky in terms of my timing and coming out here.
Yeah. What is as a production designer, even but what when you were doing before theater or when you started doing films, what were some of the films that you probably got inspired from that
Yeah,
this is what I want to do?
it's so strange, but I was so fortunate. Tony Walton, who I mentioned before, he was a big deal production designer as well as a
Mm-hmm.
theater designer when I was a kid growing up, and I didn't know who he was, but two of his movies had a huge imprint on me as a young kid. They opened my eyes to design for film, and the first one was Murder on the Orient Express, in a
Mm,
Simula Myth 1970s movie, which all takes place on a train in the 1930s, and
yep.
all these great costumes and textures and style that, a 10-year-old kid who lived in a crappy farm town had never seen anything like that before. Um, and then some years later, probably 4 or 5 years later, I saw one of Tony's older British movies called The Boyfriend, which is a Ken Russell bonkers extravaganza. It's just so over the top, theatrical, hilarious. Um, and those two really jolted me awake. And the final one wasn't a Tony Walton movie, but the one that really landed for me the most of all is The Red Shoes, the Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger film. That one has stayed with me. That movie is a constant source of inspiration for me.
That's amazing. Murder on Orient Express, I saw a long time ago. Obviously, did a remake with Kenneth Branagh. I think it was a Kenneth Branagh version, or it could be something
Yeah,
else.
yeah,
Yeah. But no, that's really cool. And I think your earlier part of your career, you worked on, correct me if I'm wrong, I may be mixing this up. Alias? Did you work on Alias?
I did. Yeah,
Yes, yeah. That was with JJ, right?
yeah. That was where we had worked on a season of Felicity together before. He was still doing that show when I met him, but it was with the pilot of Alias that he and I really connected and discovered kindred soul, shall we say.
And working with him on that show compared to working with him on Mission Impossible, obviously they're several years apart. What was something that, when you work with someone for quite a bit, it becomes like a shorthand. that you
Hmm.
understand each other, the way you guys work and move in during the production. What was that change of experience like working with him between those two projects, if any?
There were, it was an evolution, of course, as a creative collaborative partnership, you learn to create your own verbal language about visual things. Um, and we did that, and we came at the storytelling from really different points of view. Before working with him, I wasn't really strong on the emotions of storytelling, nor was I all that tuned into making the visual world of a story really deeply accessible to a viewer. It's those are things that JJ is best at, and I learned those qualities from him. He was always, especially I remember doing the first Star Trek movie.
Mm,
He kept using the word accessible. We need to make this accessible to today's audience. They need to feel that the world that we're in, even though it's 200 years in the future, that it makes sense, that they can believe it exists. And so that at that point, I think we were really hitting the highest points of our collaboration. And in Mission Impossible, we we were supporting each other because we were both kind of scared shitless doing that huge scale movie.
yeah,
And I don't know if you know, but Tom at that point, he'd gone through I think, two directors and maybe two scripts of what was supposed to be number three, and they even started pre-production on it in Germany and built some sets and had locations chosen, and they had vehicles in a warehouse and all of that stuff. And then Tom just shut it down, and there was a lot of pressure on Tom and Paula Wagner, who was his producing partner at the time, to
yeah,
get it going and to choose the right person for them to make the show happen. So, on the one hand, JJ was thrilled that Tom and Paula were coming to Disney every week while we were shooting Alias and trying to charm him into to taking the job of writing the script and directing it. And on the
yeah.
other hand, like, oh my God, it's like I'm going from this modestly budget series to the biggest fucking budget in the world. Help, please, Scott. So we helped each other, and it was such a pleasure. I would there in the prep period, all these seasoned pros who were looking at JJ and I like two television pieces of shit who didn't know anything. Um, they were so flipped out by JJ's lack of willing to commit to ideas and concepts and shots. Even they were like, I don't know how everybody was just so nervous that we would never get anything done because he he improvises until he can't anymore. And literally the minute we started shooting and he got behind the camera and he was fully in charge and he knew exactly what he wanted to do, everybody around went, "Oh, oh, he does know something. Oh, actually, he's really smart and he's funny. And look, he's secure. What the hell? How great!" And from that moment on, it just like went really well.
That's really cool, man. Thanks for sharing that. I knew about the multiple scripts, but I didn't know about the Germany set and all that, which makes me wonder because Mission Impossible 2, even though when it came out, I thought it was cool, but that's one Mission Impossible I haven't seen more than once, and I think that put a lot of pressure probably on Tom Cruise because it went a completely different direction because at that time, Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon and films like that, Jackie Chan,
Wow.
they were really taking over Hollywood in terms of audience accepting that kind of action. And I wonder if that had to do with more, aside from what you mentioned, because the second one wasn't really that critically successful or even commercially, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's not very good. It's
Yeah,
the one I looked at and thought, ugh, we can do better than that.
yeah. One of the things I did notice, I don't know if you remember this, Aaron Paul is in Mission Impossible 3.
I didn't.
Jesse
Who is that?
Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad.
Oh, how about that?
So he plays. He has like a literally quick shot, a snap where he interacts with Tom Cruise. I think from the dialogue, I think he was Michelle, who plays Julia, her
Yeah.
brother. So
Oh,
yeah, I think he just came in like for, like 10, 15 seconds and that was it.
oh, so he was probably in the party scene at the beginning of the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, 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 yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that's another funny thing. The Tom Cruise's house, I based it literally on JJ and Katie's house. That kitchen is a replica down to the dimensions of their kitchen in the house they used to live in at that time.
Any reason for that? Just to feel at home? Was that it?
Yeah, I asked him when I was talking with JJ. I asked him when while he was writing the script, what was he envisioning? What kind of home? And JJ said, "Well, I'll confess something to you. I was writing the script and I was envisioning myself as Tom Cruise and all of the home scenes taking place in my house." And I was like, "Okay, great. I'm coming over."
That's pretty wild. That's pretty wild.
When when
Um,
he was on the set the first day of shooting that, he was completely wigged out. He called his wife Katie and said, "You're not going to believe this. Scott really did replicate our kitchen. It's here. You have to know."
well, another way would have been, which you probably never would have gotten permission from his wife, was let's just go to your house and shoot everything there.
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't
Yeah. Working on Mission Impossible 3, we talked about some things already, but in terms of your vision and your design, and one aspect that you mentioned about shots not being wide enough to give you that feel, what was, other than those things, what was the most challenging part? You can talk about a scene, you can talk about a location, or whatever sort of comes to mind that I know it's been a long time, it's almost been 20 years.
yeah. You know, the one I was most concerned about being able to pull off effectively was the underground, the crypt underneath the Vatican. It, because it was such a theatrical conceit to do that, and it's not based on, a real spot in Vatican City at all. Um, but I was unsure that we would be able to pull it off in a convincing manner. And fortunately, we had such great artisans doing the plaster work and the painting down there that at the end of the day, I was so proud of it. But again, it's just like you don't really get the richness of the environment down there because of the shots being so tight.
Yeah. And, obviously you're working with JJ, but there's producers too. Tom Cruise is a producer on the film, Paula Wagner. Were your any engagements ever with one of them, even
Oh
in
yeah.
passing?
Oh, a
Any
lot.
stros-
Very
any
hands-on. Tom and Paula were always present. And I have to say, Paula was incredibly supportive for JJ and I when they decided that they wanted him. They gave him full support. And when he decided he wanted to take some of us from his team as opposed to being surrounded by Academy Award winners, which is what Paula and Tom were wanting to make happen to begin with. Once they got on board with really supporting JJ in the way he wanted to be supported, they were present 100% for us. And Tom, I will always have respect and love for Tom because of his respect and love for JJ. And also, I mean, this is completely ridiculous, but something that's important to me when I'm doing a job is I want to introduce myself to whoever the stars are and make my presence known and felt so that they understand I'm a human being who's there to help them do their job and support them. And I also want to have a good time with them. So in the early days, I would be going up to Tom, which nobody ever did, and cracking stupid jokes or just like being the ridiculous person that I can be when I work.
No, no,
And
that's not
finally,
ridiculous.
he got it. He understood that I wasn't there to mess with him and I wasn't there making fun of him. I was being with him the same way I am with JJ or was with JJ. And he got it. He finally got it, and was a delight to work with. And he worked so hard. It blew my mind that how dedicated he was, and I imagine still is. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to pull off what
Yeah.
he continues to pull off. But he would always surprise me. And it's not to say he's a perfect human being by any means. And, watch out if that guy gets ticked off at something that's going on during a shoot. That's not a happy scene. In fact, Kerry Russell came and hid behind me once when he was going off, uh, when they were doing a scene together. Um, but
Well, there was the whole thing with the during the COVID, his audio got leaked, right? And
yeah,
I don't know if and which I was watching in the recent interview with McHugh, he talked about that how there was only like 5 people in the room, and he got upset because it doesn't matter what you believe about COVID, whether it's real or fake. The bottom line was there are rules and you have to follow even if you don't agree with it, and the rules were not being followed, and he lost it. He's a human being. Who wouldn't, right? There's so
and
much stress.
it's true. I mean, him losing it, I think there's a bit of performance in that too when he does that. I
Mm,
mean, he's an actor, and if if he's going to commit to something, he commits big. There we
yeah.
are.
And you mentioned what you mentioned about being ridiculous and joking with Tom Cruise. I don't think that's ridiculous. I think the thing is, on a film set, there's so much pressure. There's so much, there's so much that needs to be done, and you need to have that thing. And I always find one of the things I've learned more on this podcast than I've learned with uh, the films that I've directed is that when I'm talking to people who have shot films like English Patient, like John Seal or John Schwartzman, who's done The Rock, people who worked with like Spielberg, Michael Bay, like, big, big names. If I come across to them as like, oh my God, I'm your biggest fan, it doesn't suit them. Everybody wants to be they even appreciate, like me talking to you, you're one of the top production designers. Like you probably appreciate the way I'm communicating with you because it's just like at the same level. And I think people genuinely like that, even if they don't show that.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. I mean, the people who don't want that, I kind of avoid,
There are
honestly.
there are some, yes, but I think more or less most people are pretty good about it, I think, but you would know better.
Yeah, there's some people, some directors that I've had the privilege of working with that I do not ever want to have that privilege again. Um, s- they're all types out there.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, you talked about Star Trek, which I'm glad you mentioned because I I'm not a Trekkie, like like a Trekkie documentary that came out 25 years ago, but I've watched Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, The Voyager, and all that. And all the films that came with Star Trek, starting from the very first one with William Shatner, all the way up to Next Generation cast. The only one that I really liked was First Contact. I don't know if you've seen it. I I'm just kind of putting it out there. But other than that, when this one came out, the one the re kind of like a relaunch of Captain
Yeah.
Kirk's earlier. I remember I've seen that trailer for that film so many times. It's probably one of the best trailers ever made, in my
Hmm.
view. And what makes it amazing is what you were going back to is that and that's why I like JJ's work in terms of storytelling, not necessarily visuals, is that he has this ability to ground characters by having simple conversation between them, like a father and son relationship, or two friends, and that's what connects the audience. Everything else is necessary, absolutely, but he just has this magical touch, I feel, that not many directors out there have from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, the that point was proven to me again. It's Star Trek. I haven't seen these movies since they came out, but at AFI, I've been one of the directing and producing professors there asked me to come in and do a Star Trek presentation for their class, which was something I put together as a promotional event for AFI a few years ago.
Sure.
And what he did was he showed as an introduction the clip of the first scene in the movie when the Kelvin ship is um, in danger and about to go
Yep.
down, and the wife is pregnant and delivering the baby and all that stuff. And the whole melodrama and spectacle of that sequence blew me away. It was so emotional. all those human qualities that you're talking about were captured, at the beginning of the movie with characters that we don't know at all, but the situation that they're in is immediately identifiable, and you get the intensity of it right off the bat. And that's the pitch that he starts that movie with. And I was so impressed seeing that. It's something that I don't think I really understood the first time around, because when you're deeply involved in putting a movie
Yeah.
together, it's hard to have any critical distance from it.
Yeah, no, that's I completely agree with you on that. We can talk about Mission Impossible, but your career is so rich and so vast. Um, and Mission Impossible came out almost 20 years ago. You probably started working on it definitely 20 years ago because it came out in 2006, I think. Um, what have you learned in the past 2 decades? Not to make you sound like old, but that you have become a better human being slash better production designer slash storyteller in the art form that you do.
I think the thing that I can offer you is that I start each new project with a blank slate and don't come in with preconceptions about it. And I have the awareness to allow the story to reveal itself to me. And starting a project with an open mind is I think vital as the foundation for building something that has merit. You know, I guess it's sort of a life lesson. You really don't know anything to begin with, and you learn as you go.
Mhm. And when you're starting, sorry, go on. I thought you were done. Pardon me?
Does that make any sense at all? It's
Yeah, it does. It does. But I'm going to add a little bit more to that is that when you're starting on a project, let's say, we just talked about Kiss of the Spider Woman. Um, what do you, how do you start on a project after you've read the script? For me personally, I love watching films that I enjoy, like Godfather, Schindler's List, English Patient, stuff like that, before I embark on a project, or even if I'm working on a project, continuously watching something just to constantly get my juices going. Do you do anything like that?
um no, not at all. In fact, I avoid looking at other movies when I'm putting a film
Good.
together. Uh, this is the Spider Woman is a complete exception to that, though, because that is a movie about movies, and the research of looking at all of the musical numbers in particular that had inspired Bill Condon to write what he did. It was vital for me to be plugged into all of that material. And fortunately, because those old musicals are something I'm deeply interested in anyway and always have been, I know a whole lot about that period in filmmaking and those stars and that music and all that. That's just like actually
Ah,
it's my home base. So the fact that I got to design a movie that was about all of that stuff was such a gift, an unexpected gift for me, as I'm so typecast in science fiction.
amazing. I'm sure you've seen Evita,
Yeah, not a fan of
something
that.
that, not a
Right.
fan of that. I, that's fine. So I'll tell you my story about Evita. I'm not crazy about musicals, just being honest, right? I remember I went to see Evita with my friend, not knowing at all it was musical. We
And
sat
not
down
knowing
and
playing
yeah,
a 16-year-old.
yeah, and then it started, and like, okay, when is this going to end? And my friend goes, "This is the film musical." I'm like, "Really?" Oh, but I mean, if I look at it now, I should watch it again. Like the costumes, the performance, the production design. I probably didn't notice it at the time, but I think it probably spoke for itself in that way. But I'm sure it
Yeah.
had its weaknesses and stuff.
Oh God, yeah.
What are
Yeah.
some of your favorite films? Not
Um,
necessarily production designer standpoint, just in general.
I love The Conformist, the Bertolucci movie from 1970,
Okay.
and I'm a huge fan of Juliet of the Spirits, which is one of Fellini's 1960s films, his first in color. I love the Antonioni dramas from the early 60s, like L'Eclise and La Notte. Um,
I gotta
also,
watch these movies. I've never seen these movies, so I gotta watch them.
oh, you wouldn't look at my resume and think that that's my taste in filmmaking, but I mean, my resume isn't my taste in filmmaking. It's what I get hired to do, and I've loved designing for science fiction and adventure and espionage and all of that stuff. But my go-to entertainments are very different.
Interesting. But I'm sure there's a little bit of all of that in the work that you do because that's something you really like, right? Like that's what more or less inspires you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller,
Yeah.
and my medium isn't words, it's visuals. You know, I'm hoping with Spider-Woman coming out that people might look at me with a little more dimensionality to their decision making and understand that I can do more than pull space out of my ass.
I will be very honest with you, and I'm not making this up. So when you sent the link
Uh-huh.
just before this podcast,
Yep.
Sumi sent it to me. I watched it, and as I'm watching it, I have no idea in my head, even though I know it's you sent it, that you know you worked on as a production designer. Because to me, in that trailer, the only thing I saw were two things. Obviously, Jennifer Lopez, she's the main character, but the work around it, the space, the scenes, the sets, and everything. So I think even in the trailer it shows. I mean,
Oh, good.
the movie's going to be something else, I'm sure.
Yeah. I saw
Amazing.
the completed cut of it, and it's so powerful. I'm so proud of it.
You should be. You should be. Even if the film is terrible, you should be proud of your work.
Yes, there is that. There are those on the resume as well.
No, no, I'm sure it's going to be great. I mean, if it's being targeted for October, obviously it has received some good feedback from audiences, test screenings, and studio executives that they're putting it there in that realm. So that's really good.
Great.
Uh, what's cooking for you next, or what's genre that you want to do that you haven't touched yet? Without, if you don't want to reveal anything, that's fine. It's just my job to ask questions.
No, it's fine. I honestly I don't have anything lined up right now. It's been deadly quiet, and the industry in America is in a really sad place right now because the corporations who run all the studios have understood in the last 5 years that they can make films much more cheaply overseas than they can here in the States. So once again, America has exported one of its main industries um, offshore. And a whole lot of us who normally are continually in demand and constantly working are sitting around twiddling our thumbs going, now what do we do? Um, and if if I do get another job before I quit the business, I hope it has something to do with history and not so much to do with futurism because I think I've blathered enough in terms of designing ideas of the future, and I would love to take more peeks at history and see what can be presented in a way that has a contemporary impact. I would love that challenge.
Amazing. And what you said about work, it's everybody I talk to, even in Canada, it's the same story. Like it's just doesn't seem like there's any work around anymore.
No.
Right? And I was watching, I think it was Mel Gibson's interview or somebody else's. Somebody said that it's cheaper to fly to Ireland with 100 crew members than to go across the street on a soundstage and produce a scene or a film.
And you know what
Uh,
it is? They don't the corporations, the money people, they don't want to pay the benefits of the workers. The whole business about strikes and our union and all of that, that is just to give American labor health benefits. It's that simple. It's 33 to 35% on top of the labor costs themselves that the union health benefits cost the studios, and they would prefer not to have to pay that to anybody. Thank you very much. So they go to countries where healthcare is nationalized, very civilized, and they, scrape off that 35% of money that they don't have to spend anymore, and then they gobble up the gigantic tax incentives that those countries give them, as much as 35 to 50% back.
Yeah.
Suddenly, there's 85% of the budget that they get for free. And there goes the industry.
Well, what wasn't it Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, who said recently that it needs to be like 100% tariffs if you start making films outside? I think he said something like that, right? I haven't read the intricate details of it. Um,
Yeah.
do you think that something like that is a solution, or is that too extreme? I'm not trying to bring politics into it, but it's just because it's related to the industry.
I think it's a thoughtless comment on his part. There is no reality to that notion. It would not work out in the way the stable genius suggests it would.
And so, what's the solution then? Like, how? Because I mean, look, for me personally, maybe I'm not speaking for everybody. As much as I love where I am, for me, when I think about films, I literally think of LA, and that's it. I'm not saying that we should not make films anywhere else in the world. You should, if the location demands it, like the Mission Impossible films. But then what's the solution? Is it more like nationalizing health benefits, or what would you suggest to people in power?
It's really hard. It's California itself isn't really supporting
Yeah,
the film industry, and if the home state won't support it, I don't see how anybody else can really bring it back or make it viable or make it more affordable for the corporations. I mean, it's the state we're in is just a reflection of what America's priorities have always been in the first place. We call ourselves a democracy. I think we're more likely a market economy than a democracy, and winner takes all in such environments. So
but do you think that was the case in the 90s and 80s?
um things were different.
Yeah.
Everything was different then. The circumstances, the priorities. We America wasn't as internationally minded in the entertainment business as it's
Mm-hmm.
been. And in the from the 80s and 90s, there weren't the filmmaking professionals all around the country and all around the world as there are today. And it was the tax incentives themselves that started creating other film professional communities around the country and around the world. It's, the dollar chase bred
Yeah.
training, and this just seems like an evolution that can't be reversed.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you because I think in 90s and 80s some of the best movies were made, and now because there was a lot of studios that were not necessarily owned by companies. I mean, I think that started in the late 90s, but now what do you got left? Disney, uh, Warner Brothers, what else? Paramount, and I think
Paramount,
and maybe one more I'm forgetting. That's about it. You only got
so
Universal.
Universal. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got like only four major not production companies, studios that are left, and Disney has bought a lot of stuff, right? Um, and
Don't forget
now there's
Netflix. It's a different
Netflix.
business now.
Yeah, yeah, Netflix too. So yeah, it's interesting times. It's interesting times. And now with the advent of AI, there's always that thought in the
Uh,
back of the head that how is that going to play, but we'll see.
it's already having a huge impact. I use it a lot.
So do I. So do I. Almost every single day.
Yeah.
But we'll see what happens. I know I appreciate you doing the work that you do, Scott, and I know these are tough times, but I think after Kiss of the Spider Woman, things will go up north for you for sure.
I hope so. We'll see. Thank you.
Fingers crossed. I would love to chat with you again, maybe before Kiss of Spider-Woman, for another film if you have time, sometime late summer. This has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and for your work.
I've enjoyed it too. Thank you very much, and I hope things go well for you too.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.